And I think that actually having kids in some regard, one, motivates you more to get you going because you've got this next generation, and I never want my kids to turn to me and say, well, how come you let that happen? You know, it's like I am very motivated to be able to say, you know, at some point to my children when they're a little bit more cognizant, or my grandchildren or something, you know what, I did everything that I possibly could as soon as I knew so that I could hand you something that was worthwhile.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson. I'm in the California seacoast city of Pacific Grove near Monterey, and my guest is Deborah Lindsay. Thanks for having me here.
Thank you.
And being here.
Glad you're here.
At your house.
Yes.
Deborah, you're the director of Sustainable Monterey County, and you're a peak oil educator, which not everybody is going to say they are, and a community solution evangelist, which is a very interesting set of titles, actually. So I'm going to take you back to the beginnings. How did you get involved with all this?
Well, I actually had the great pleasure of studying with Richard Heinberg at New College of California in Santa Rosa. I graduated that program. It's a BA completion program last year. And it really was the program itself, sort of a tearing down of the American way of life.
Tearing down?
Well, a pulling apart of what we consider is real and true in the standards of America. I mean, they break that all apart in their culture, ecology, and sustainable community program. And then it's built back up, with the frame of peak oil, and how is that going to unravel in our community? What does that mean?
Unravel, interesting.
So it's a little bit disorienting when you come into the program and you don't really know that that's going to happen to you. And halfway through the program, as I'm reading The Party's Over, and I'm crying.
Which is Richard's book. Richard's
first book on peak oil. And just crying my eyes out and thinking, oh my God, what is it that I can do? This is so serious.
Well, tell me a little bit what's going on in your mind. Obviously, to bring up that much emotion, what were you picturing? What are you getting there?
When I left the program, I wasn't clear that I was going to become a director of an organization that I founded. That wasn't what I had in mind. Originally, I had gone to go into their next program, a green MBA program. But my paradigm had shifted so much that I knew that I just sort of needed to stop and process what I had learned. And I think that it's very important for people when they come to the realization of peak oil, that they take stock in what their skills are at the moment and what their passions are, and then weave it in some way.
I think I want to back up for a second, because I think one of the things that happens when you read Richard Heinberg's book, his Power Down book, or The Party's Over, is that it's a very vivid description. It's sort of like he doesn't hold back at the possibility that we may reach peak oil, which means not that we run out of oil, but this lubricant that we run our whole culture on is going to be expensive, and it may have shortages and so on, and that we can no longer continue building our whole world on this. The thing that hit me so strong is we don't have anything else to trade it in, swap for that.
Right.
And that's when you start thinking of, what would the world be like without all the gasoline and the oil? How do we get around? How do we get our food? So I wanted to add that in and see what kinds of pictures you were forming, because I think folks who are viewing this, who haven't read it, may wonder what in the world we're talking about.
Right. Well, the other thing is that I have an event coordination background. Before I had children, I did large-scale musical events. And something that you need to have, a skill that you need to have, is that you need to be able to really see in your mind how an event is going to be played out. And so it was very easy for me to imagine. I had a very active imagination of how this was going to play out. And I think that people who really kind of get it have that skill, because they can see okay, this domino effect is going to happen to this, and then that's going to happen to this. And unless we get something set up, then it's not going to be it's not going to be managed very well, you know. And so I really actually had to give myself permission to become a public speaker and say, would it be all right? I remember actually sitting here and speaking with my husband and some of his friends and saying, do you think that I can actually go out and be a public speaker? And they looked at me and said, well, what are you talking about? Of course, why are you asking that question? But I don't know, for some reason I needed to stop and say that was so daring, maybe, to go out and do that. And it actually has worked very well. My background for the last 13 years has been with my children. And so now I have these teenagers, and I have learned how to speak about peak oil to children or to two young adults, and also to families, because
That's
this is
important.
This is my realm.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
this is
yeah.
I'm speaking to what I know already.
So
And-
what do you tell, and how do they respond? What do you say to them?
Well, of course, teens and parents are going to be two different things.
Yeah.
Teens, you have to be, I think the key to actually talking to teens is talking to them when they're in the classroom. If you try to create a group outside of that, the topic of peak oil is too much like a lecture that you might have in school. So it's trying to arrange sort of a workshop or something like that. It's not very attractive. So going
Yeah,
in and
I heard of it.
getting into a science classroom, or I've done somewhere where it's a government policy class, and then doing a very basic sort of the quick and easy guide to peak oil. They don't want all of the statistics.
They don't need the graphs and the charts and the whatever. They need to know how's it going to affect them, right, or the world.
That's right.
Uh-huh.
And then it's almost like, and this is actually what I prefer, which is, you know, here's the little bit, here's the 10 minutes maybe of what peak oil is, and then let's get to solutions. You know, I just really want to just frame it and then get to it, you know, get to all the other things that we can do. It's one of the things that bothers me a little bit about the movie End of Suburbia. There's another movie coming out, a fabulous movie called Crude Impact, but it's, you know,
It's all about-
2/3 of the problem, and then, you know, just a little bit at the end of the
And
solution.
that's similar to the climate change Al Gore's movie, is that we've got 90%
Inconvenient.
of this is on, in The Inconvenient Truth, is on all of the terrible impacts of climate change, climate chaos, with this little tacked on piece at the end of, you know, swap out to compact fluorescent bulbs. It's like, magnitude of this, we need a whole lot more than these, we need a lot of things in addition to that.
Right. So my
I'm-
part is more about, okay, well, let's start with solutions. And then as you're telling the story of the solutions, you can weave in more of why.
Okay.
So that's one of the better ways to teach kids, because you can, you know, you kind of, well, maybe one of the things I would say is, all right, let's look at your career. I mean, here you are, you're going to be making a career change or a
Right.
decision
Right.
at one point. Imagine how it will be if we have less energy then, you know, in 5 years or whenever you're going to be done.
Right.
What could you do? Would it be useful to be a sales manager for some middle management company? Or would it be useful to be an engineer that can actually change, you know, manipulate, mechanical engineer, where you're able to take things and make something else with it? Could you be a solar power installer? I mean,
Right.
that might be something.
Right. Right.
You know,
So having them think about a different world, a different reality, because there's going to be plenty of jobs needed and opportunities, but in very different realms than they probably are now thinking about.
Right. And so, you know, and they don't need all of the answers. They just need to have some new way to think about something. So it's just dropping in another little ball, you know, just how about this? And of course, when I'm talking with parents, that's another part. What are you helping your kids think about as far as the future goes?
Don't you have to sort of, you have to frame for them this whole peak oil reality? What kind of responses are you getting as you tell parents about this?
Well, I gave a lecture in Oregon this summer, and the title of the lecture, well, I did a little workshop, and the title of the workshop was how to keep your family safe during peak oil. That was the name of it. And actually it was rather intense. I think if I were to do it again, I would back it off a little bit. But most of the people that were in the audience had already heard about what peak oil was. So I didn't need to give that part of it. And but I was very frank in saying things like, you know, maybe it would be better to not have your kids learning how to scrapbook, for example. What is that? Why would you give them that as something to do in the future? Because there's no intrinsic value of what you would be needing to do.
In learning
Get
how
your
to
kids
scrapbook.
outdoors, unstructured time outdoors, so that one, they can get an appreciation for it, and two, they can figure out what it's like to be out there. What would you need to do if you had to chop a bunch of wood? You know, there's so much in-house, small manipulative work that kids are doing now, rather than big muscle.
Or playing with a computer. I could imagine. I mean, you're thinking, well, because we don't know how peak oil is going to play out. We really don't. There's a whole set of sort of practical skills that our culture, in our luxury, if you will, and our affluence, don't need to do anymore. For example, I'll do a simple one: sewing. You don't need to learn to sew because our clothing is so cheap, and so on. And yet that could be one of those practical skills that would be very valuable to have.
Absolutely. Sewing, learning how to, well, garden, of course, is
Gardening, of course,
the
a
main
big one,
important thing. And I really bring that up to kids and adults as well. There's other, I mean, I have a little list here.
I'm curious to know what you
Well,
suggest.
there is, of course, you know, how do you bring in the curriculum into your school, whether if you're a parent of somebody who's in school or you're in a school, how do you bring this curriculum, whether it's even just something like a garden, into the school? How do you choose a school that appreciates more of those skills? Waldorf, for example, where they're learning hands-on woodwork and that type of thing.
Right.
One of the things that I really recommend is to not have more children. And I bring this up to families.
That's a big one.
It's a really big one. And
I mean, you're tiptoeing on dangerous turf here.
I know.
Right?
But when I say most seriously, I don't want to know that you've had the experience of your child not getting enough to eat. And if we face that, which is what we actually do face, if this plays out in its most critical way, then, you know, 5 out of 6 people are going to starve. And it's not going to be, you know, just people over in India or, you know, where there's larger crowds. It's going to be here in the United States with people that I know, that I love, that you know, that you love as well. And I would much rather suggest to you to not have a child so that you don't have to have that experience. And if you're, you know, a young person and you're thinking, well, when I grow up, I'm going to have, you know, 7 kids. I come from a big family. If I'm putting the image in their mind that, well, we may not have the same type of abundance in the future, maybe you're not going to have that many kids.
That's a very different message. And of course, you're portraying a world that has far fewer resources, which is, of course, I mean, oil is just one of them. I mean, oil is one that's finite, and we're going to have less of, but we're also running out of fisheries and
Absolutely.
topsoil. And there are people who know how to build some of those. But I don't know that we can keep building. I mean, you use some things and then they're gone.
Right.
And I think the picture that I got in reading Richard was there's going to be a whole lot more hands-on relationship to creating our food, creating our transport. You know, that we can't expect it to be continuing progress as it is, you know, that we've known in our lives.
Right. So how do we retract? How do we, as James Lovelock, who many people know about the Gaia theory, who recently wrote a book called The Revenge of Gaia, and he says, how do we sustainably retreat? You know, how do we rather than sustainable growth or sustainable development, which many people who are in the green movement are working towards, which is, of course, a very, you know, right work to be doing. But as he's looking at the models of climate change, and he's saying we have to pull back, and of course that's what the oil depletion protocols are saying. We need to retract and use like 3%.
Constrain.
So how do we
3%
pull
less
back?
each year, right?
How do we do that and still have, you know, a healthy economy? We're still able to have the goods and services that we want. Now, in the United States, where we have so much excessive use of
We have
all of our
surplus, excessive use of all of our
resources.
right.
So there's many years that we can retract and not really feel too restricted.
Right,
I mean,
right.
there are people around the world that are living on a lot less resources than we are and still feel that they're having an
The
abundant
people
life.
in Europe are using half the energy that we are with
Right.
basically the same lifestyle. So we
That's
know
right.
we've got a lot of cushion in here.
That's right. So we can, pull back to say like the mid 70s as though we were living in that reality, that energy life. And, I wouldn't think that in the 70s that it was difficult or unpleasant,
no.
And, but we need to be conscious of that. And that's that, lessening of our ecological footprint. If you haven't had a chance to do that
That's
yet.
a fun thing to do. Interesting.
Yeah, if you haven't had a chance to go online and check out your ecological footprint, I would highly recommend to do that. And we've been doing that recently, and I was trying to figure out my planet, or how many planets I would need, and what I would have to do to make it so that if everyone lived like I did, that we would only need one planet. Because I'm at
Right.
about 3.5 planets right now with my lifestyle. And so it's a little
That's
trick.
illuminating.
Yeah, and I live in a very small house, and I live in a small town, and make most of my own food. But I still need 3.5 planets.
That's astounding. And right now, World Wildlife Fund is saying that overall on the whole planet, we are using a planet and a quarter's worth of resources right now with
Right.
population now, and that by the middle of the century, we'll be needing 2 planets worth of resources. We don't have 2 planets worth of resources.
No. So what does that translate? That translates out to people who are not getting enough to meet their daily needs, not just in countries that, like I say, are farther away, but are countries here. So that's why I recommend to people to try to curb having their children. And of course, you can go into energy efficiency. That's how most people, that's the angle that a lot of people take.
Sure.
And it's appropriate because, of course, that's one of the places that we can reduce and still, live a nice, normal lifestyle. I really encourage people to turn off their televisions, and not right now, not while you're watching this show, but, televisions are producing consumers.
Yes.
And what I think we need to get back to, and this isn't my thought, although I can't remember where I got this from, but the idea is that we're citizens, and citizens are much more active and involved in their communities. And so the whole mentality that television encourages is not one that I find very acceptable. That's not what I'm not. I'm not just a consumer. I'm a participant in this community.
The television culture really engenders that kind of passivity and that kind of viewing of I'm just here to buy and to buy and to buy. And it just happened after 9/11 when President Bush said, what can you do? Go shopping. It's like, wait a minute, is that all we are? I mean, it was just shocking to think about that.
Right.
Well, as a citizen, you're talking about becoming engaged with your community.
Right.
In responding to whatever it is that you care about.
Right.
But I see an awful lot of people in these days just working very hard, particularly with families, and I would expect this to be true, working very hard just to get by.
I know. Yeah.
Because our economics are much more difficult. The middle class is getting squeezed. Wealth has been, transferred to the wealthier people. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to know how you're seeing that with families, that squeeze.
Well, I certainly see it, but I also, if I were to say, well, I probably belong to the middle class, and my group of people, peers, and probably the people that I'm speaking with are probably folks that are at least partially in this group with me. And, those folks have a lot of places that they can actually just make smaller steps. I mean, do your kids need to have the designer clothes that are just coming off the racks? Can you go and buy your clothes at Goodwill? Can you, maybe instead of buying a new CD every week, maybe you go and buy one once a month? Do you have to have the vacations that are traipsing you around the globe? Can you be satisfied with being somewhere local? Can you just, all of these little trimmings? I mean, it's like, taking the fat off of pork roast. It's just, where can you just cut it a little bit,
yeah.
a little bit, And of course, there's going to be places where somebody just says, I am not doing without my clothes dryer. That's in fact one of the things that I have said. It was just like, I'm raising a family. I do so much laundry. It's not even funny. I can't do without my clothes dryer. Okay. But what can I do without? Well, let's see. I can do without maybe a family vacation that I have to get into an airplane with. I can do without that. We can find another fun family vacation that I don't have to do.
So, what kind of response are you getting? I mean, because you've got a tough message. Have fewer children. Don't consume. I mean, these are not very American messages at this point.
Okay, so the good messages are, well, it's the celebration, right? I mean, it's the fact that I'm here with my family, and that the real treasure, the real gift that I have in my life is these wonderful people that are in that are just sitting with me right now. And finding something to nurture when it's going through this whole peak oil thing is so important, because it's really easy to spin out on, in your mind about all of this stuff.
And how difficult it could be.
Absolutely.
And sure. It could be scary.
Get very scary. And I know single people who I meet, and you can sort of see that they're a little bit like,
white knuckle.
They are.
Yes.
And I think that actually having kids in some regard, one, motivates you more to get you going, because you've got this next generation, and I never want my kids to turn to me and say, well, how come you let that happen? It's like I am very motivated to be able to say, at some point to my children when they're a little bit more cognizant, or my grandchildren or something, you know what, I did everything that I possibly could as soon as I knew, so that I could hand you something that was worthwhile. So the legacy issue is very important. What I was going to say about, knowing single people is that often they don't have that thing that they can nurture, which then, not always, but I've seen this a couple of times, that makes me encourage people to find something that they can really love and nurture, because then you know why you're doing this.
Yeah.
I have 3 dogs, and I love being with them. And so it makes me remember, okay, maybe they're just dogs. They're not necessarily going to know what's going on with all of this stuff, but I have so much happiness from them, and I have so much happiness from my children, that in fact, when I stop and when I can fill my cup with that rather than stuff,
yes,
and just enjoy being with them more than anything, then actually it's not much of a trade-off. It's quite easy.
Well, I think that the kind of materialism we've seen in America is sort of filling a hole that's deeper than that for people. Filling a hole where we are not connected to one another and want to be, not connected to the natural world and want to be.
Yeah.
We have about 3.5 minutes left, our little gems that we want to get.
Well, the connecting to the nature is actually make sure that you have unconstrained time with nature, because what they have found is that even being with some scouts, or whether kids with adults where they're doing maybe a hunting activity or something like this, they don't get the same type of relationship with nature as when they just have time out there without any kind of parameters. They have found that people who get that type of time actually have a much more deeper understanding and response to nature. And so that would be something that I would encourage, along with the other items that I've just brought up.
I think that's one of the major disconnects that our industrialized lives has brought about. And I think that if people are not to be afraid, but to see nature as part of what we are part of, the web of life that we're all part of, I think it's really important.
Any other gems? Well, I would think that if you're a woman and you're watching this, that it's really important to remember that you have permission to do what you need to do to make this transition easy and prepare your family. I am finding some women who are holding back because they don't necessarily feel that they can make the steps needed, that maybe they need to check in, that it has to be a mutual decision in their family. And I would just say, go ahead and do what you need to start doing, because it's got to be done, and that's how we'll be better off. Your family will be.
So you want to empower women, not necessarily to have their partners, their spouses agree with the
just
steps
start
they
doing
need to
what
do.
you need to do.
I think that, historically that's what women have done because of that, our innate, our wiring. We are here thinking about the next generation, making sure they're fed, making sure they're clothed.
Right. So put food away. That's a big thing.
Yeah.
Start storing food, Start putting the food away. And, that's a little bit of that survivalist thing, but I think that it's good in any kind of crisis, no matter what it is.
Whether it's an earthquake or a massive storm. I mean, Katrina taught us that. If we didn't learn anything, is that level of emergency preparedness is just wise to do regardless. So you've got the flashlights, and you've got the matches, and you've got a way to, have water, and you know where you can get it from. If the water mains turn off.
Because as things unfold, what we want to do is have our wits about us. We don't want to be in a crisis mode at the crisis time. We want to go into those moments as calm and as clear-headed as we can, because then social justices will stay in place, environmental justices will stay in place, and we'll be able to protect our families better.
I think the wisdom that Mike Rupert said is, what we need to know we have are options. So part of the preparedness that you're talking about and the clear-headedness is if you know where you have food stored and how you get water and how to purify it if you need to and so on, you have options.
Right.
When things may not be what you expect or what you're used to.
Right. Right.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank
for your work.
for being there, talking to the young people and to the parents, because that's really important. This has been great.
And it's fun,
That's the way it is?
Yeah.
That's great. That's great.
It is.
Thanks for joining me. You're watching Peak Moment, Community Responses for a Changing Energy Future. I'm Janaea Donaldson. Join us next time.